fear aside, go out there and explore because you will likely find a practice that really appreciates you and is really happy to have you and is really going to treat you well and pay you well.
Welcome to Be Empowered, the podcast. This is a podcast where we dive into the realities of healthcare and entrepreneurship. We offer our opinion, unfiltered, unapologetic, and always with a dose of empowerment. We're here to amplify voices, yours and ours, challenge the status quo, and explore what it truly means to thrive. So let's get into it. I'm Dr. Santoshi Bilakota,
And I'm Dr. Shala Mokbel.
and today we have Dr. Susan Flyer. She's an anesthesiologist and an intensivist. She started her career as a registered nurse and then went to medical school. So she brings a rare and powerful dual perspective to medicine. Through her social media presence, she speaks out on systemic inequities in healthcare, gender bias, and racism in medical training. She also speaks on APP scope creep and reclaiming autonomy in a broken system as a locums physician. So, Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like to share about yourself to the audience or introduce yourself further?
Well, I think a lot of people who follow me on social media know this. Thank you for having me, ladies. I really appreciate this. This is my first ever podcast. Woohoo! But I'm originally from Kenya. I was born in Kenya and I moved to the States at the age of 11. And then once I finished high school, I joined the military. And then I initially became an LPN through the military. And then I transitioned from LPN to RN. Then I went on to medical school. So that's more of a background for me. But yes, I grew up in Dallas, Fort Worth when I moved to the States. And then I joined the military and went to San Antonio, went to Missouri, and then ended up somewhere in Texas again.
You've lived many lives. But
Thank
I
you.
think I think your background also gives you, like we said, a unique perspective. So can you tell us how that journey went from being an LPN to an MD and kind of where you are now?
Sure. Um, so I'm not exactly sure when this need in me developed to become a physician, but since I was a young child, people would always ask me what I wanted to do when I grew up. And from when I was young, I would always say I wanted to be a doctor. And in fact, my stepsisters, they talk about it now. It's like, yeah, when she first moved here from Kenya, you would ask her and she was this big because I was very small. And she would always say, I want to be a doctor. And look at her now. So I don't know where it is. I didn't have any family that were doctors. My dad was a nurse, but when I came here, he was a janitor trying to go through nursing school. And I just wanted to be a doctor. But I grew up in a low income household. Like I said, my dad was a janitor. My stepmom was also a janitor. And my dad finished his nursing degree when I was like, I think about 15. So I think I was like a junior in high school. And then he started working for Parkland in Dallas. And we just didn't have money for me to go to college. But I knew I wanted to go to college and I knew I wanted to be a doctor. So trying to figure it out, trying to apply for scholarships, which I really did not have like the mentorship to know how to apply and get money for scholarships. The US Army just came knocking on my door one day and they told me that they could train me to become a licensed practical nurse. And in return, I'd have to sign up with them for 6 years and possibly face the chance of being deployed. And I thought, this is like the perfect step for me to get free medical training, healthcare training, I should be more precise, I guess, free healthcare training through nursing. And then that would kind of empower me to have a part time job as I put myself through college and therefore take out less loans and also introduce me into the medical setting. And so I signed up because I came from not, I didn't come from a place where my parents could afford for me to go to college. So I signed up and I went off to basic training in Missouri at the age of 17. Then I moved to San Antonio and did my LPN training. And then I finished that at 19, moved back to Dallas with my family. And then I started off college at junior college and I was working part time as an LPN at a rehab center. And then from there on, I moved. I wanted to be a doctor, so I wanted my major to be in biology. So when I got my associate's degree, I moved on to a 4 year college to get my biology degree. But then I realized, what if I didn't get into medical school? What am I going to do with a biology degree, right? Because a lot of people don't get into medical school. Like the acceptance rate, the matriculation rate is about what, 40%. What am I going to do? So I said, well, let me have a backup, a full backup. Let me get my bachelor's degree in nursing. So then I moved to colleges again. And then I got my bachelor's degree in nursing, finished that at 24. and then applied to medical school, and I started medical school at the age of 25. So I took this long pathway, this, journey to get to where I am today because I came from a place of financial hardship and I had to kind of make my way.
That's really interesting. Actually, it was a smart decision of yours that you decided to do the bachelor's degree in nursing, because I certainly know friends who did their bachelor's degrees in engineering, for example, in biomedical engineering, then entered medical school, and
Mhm.
their application was actually superior to the others because of the degree. So I'm sure yours as well. That's a really good path that you took. I'm sure you had some challenges. So can you name some challenges that you had from basically in this path going from a nurse to a physician?
Sure. So when I started medical school, well, I do actually do think that my nursing background gave me a step up because I had been in the healthcare space for about 6 years before I matriculated to medical school. So I think that gave me a leg up to get into medical school, plus my military background. But when I um joined medical school, and I started like, we did PBL, problem based learning, and it was hard for me to think as a physician considering I had had all these years as a nurse. And so I kind of struggled because basically when you go from nursing to medicine, you kind of have your thinking more ingrained into nursing because as nurses, we see the end product of what the physicians have done as far as a diagnostic workup. We got, the patient comes in with right lower abdominal pain, and we see the diagnosis of appendicitis. They go to the OR, they get the appendix removed, and we discharge them the next day or something like that, right? But it could be a host of other things, right? So for me, I had to kind of get out of that mentality of thinking it's one diagnosis versus it could be a multitude of diagnoses and I have to rule them out in order to arrive at the right diagnosis. So that was a bit of a struggle for me as a nurse, and I think that is a struggle that probably a lot of nurses who go through medical school struggle with because I've seen it at somebody else's page. We have to kind of rewire our whole thinking, basically our building block, just tear it all down and start over. So that was one challenge that I had. Another challenge, which I have talked about before, was my MCAT score to get into medical school. Honestly, was not that great, and for me, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I've always had to work and put myself through school. And so, therefore, I did not have the time and the resources to dedicate myself to really just mastering the MCAT. So I struggled with that. I did poorly on the MCAT, but I think everything else did propel me to get an acceptance letter to UTMB because I did graduate with a 4.0. I graduated as a valedictorian of my class. And plus, like I said, my military background, my nursing background really did help. But yeah, the challenges was working and going to school and trying to make the time out to be a good student and excel in a standardized exam, which I didn't. And then once I got to medical school, basically breaking down everything that I knew as a nurse and kind of starting over from scratch to rebuild my thinking process as a physician. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And actually, I wanted to kind of touch on the fact that you said that you don't know what propelled you to want to go into healthcare. It's just something you always wanted, because I feel
Mhm.
like everyone we've interviewed so far has said that. So it's fascinating. I think it really is a calling, but it has that word calling has kind of been weaponized against us in a
Yeah,
way, where we're being squeezed and being asked to do more in the guise of it being this like altruism.
exactly.
But in any case, so okay, now you're in medical school, and I know you've spoken about this before in your TikTok videos and other social media. But I know it wasn't easy for you as a Black woman in medicine, especially anesthesiology. How do you feel like your race and gender shaped that experience in medical school and following medical school and residency?
I was very naive going in. I was very naive because my personality, contrary to what a lot of people think on TikTok, because I do come to TikTok to unload, but my personality is very happy-go-lucky, cheerful, and I'm kind of like the person. It's like if I'm happy and you're showing me untoward, like outward happiness, and you're showing me that you like me, I'm showing you that I like you. Everything is cool. Everything is status quo, and it took me a long time to realize that not everything is as plain as it seems, and I was giving a lot of people the benefit of the doubt, and I was just in my happy-go-lucky, silly space of being goofy and having fun, that I had to realize that not everybody was looking at me as positively as I thought as the person that I thought I was. And there were people who looked at me in a negative way, even with my happy-go-lucky personality. And then I had to be careful of how I behaved in certain spaces. So basically, I had to take my personality and shrink it because of the fact that with my happy-go-lucky, opinionated, kind of loud self, some people would look at that in a negative way, more like, the unprofessional way. And some behaviors were just not going to cut it. So I had to kind of reshape the way I behaved when I was going through residency because in medical school, I had a come to Jesus talk with my dean. She was wonderful, wonderful lady who told me, you are a black woman, you need to realize where you are, and that not people are not going to give you the same benefit of the doubt as they're going to give your Caucasian counterparts. That was my first warning. And then I got to residency and I was still kind of naive until bad things started happening to me. When I said bad things started happening to me, I'm going to take responsibility in that I did make some mistakes, and then I noticed that I was like, I was getting like severe consequences for those mistakes compared to what my counterparts were getting in return with, more egregious things. So I think that's when really my blackness hit me, because I was one of two minorities in my 4-year program, and I was only the third Black person to go through that residency, which at that time was a little bit, I think it was about 25 years old or so, 20, 25 years old. And I just realized that, oh my God, I don't get looked at the same way that my Caucasian counterparts get looked at. So I have to behave differently. I have to be above and beyond because it's just not the same playing field. Not that I didn't make any mistakes. However, I feel like the consequences of my mistakes were a lot more drastic than my white counterparts. And so that's when I really realized the power of my blackness and how I felt really disempowered because I was Black.
When did you start feeling empowered in your identity as a Dr. Flyer, and not just the title?
Honestly, it didn't take too long after residency. Like my first job outside of residency, I moved to the East Coast. I moved to Pennsylvania, and I was in a small hospital. It was about a 100-bed hospital, and I was the only Black physician at that place. But I got treated well. I was respected, and it was just a stark contrast from how I was treated in residency. It was like night and day, and I was like, "Oh wow!" I was like still so unsure of myself because of all the negativity that I had endured, all the negative talk that I had, listened to in residency, being told that I was not going to graduate, being told that I still think like a nurse, being told that I'm unprofessional, that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I won't pass my boards. I still had all that negative talk that I was kind of still fighting. But then once I started my job, people basically gave me the benefit of the doubt, you know? And I was treated like an adult. And I was empowered by my partners, my employers at that time. And I was treated, well. And I was like, oh, wow, I do know what I'm talking about. I am competent. I'm not, incompetent. I do know how to take care of patients. Of course, I've passed my boards. And so it started slowly from there. But I really think it honestly took a good probably 10 years for me to really just kind of chill and relax and really be like 100% empowered because there's still times because I remember this not even too long ago, right post COVID, where I was still getting, you know, pushback from like nurses or from surgeons, and I still wasn't like speaking up for myself. But these days, that's not happening anymore. So it started, I would say, immediately after residency, but it still took a long time for me to really be 100% empowered and be happy, like be happy and content in my skin as a physician, as a competent anesthesiologist, and as a competent intensivist, to where I'm able to stand up for myself.
I'm glad you had that experience in Pennsylvania. I think sometimes a lot of this stuff it does end up being regional, even though it is like a broader issue.
Mhm.
Also, I know you guys work a lot with surgeons, and those
Right?
personalities can be variable. Sometimes very difficult. I'm sure
Yep.
where they might not take you seriously. I do know a lot of good surgeons, but there are some surgeons who do not value
Oh, for
anesthesiologists quite
sure.
as much.
Hmm.
Um, And then on top of that, you being a woman and you being a black woman, I'm sure the value they feel like starts going down. So
Yep.
that's good. Was the Pennsylvania a locums assignment, or did you work full
No,
time there?
that was a full-time job. That was my first job, and the reason I actually even moved to Pennsylvania because was for me, that was a license that I had. Even though I wanted to be in Texas, it was taking me a long time to get my Texas license because of the issues that I'd had during residency. And Texas, California, New York are notorious for being like really difficult states to get licensing in. So for us, we had to have a full license anywhere in the 50 states in order for us to take our board exam, our written exam. So I had to apply for a license, and I Googled what is the easiest and cheapest license to get because I was broke and I wanted an easy path and a cheap path. And Google search told me Pennsylvania. So I applied for a Pennsylvania license, never intending on using it as I was waiting on my Texas license. And then just the whole idea of me having to go to the Texas Medical Board and explain my probation and residency and sit in front of all these panels. And I had to get a lawyer, which I didn't have money for. I was like, forget it. Let me just go to Pennsylvania and get a job. I have a full license to practice in Pennsylvania. So I started looking for jobs in the East Coast and in Pennsylvania. And that's how I actually ended up in Pennsylvania. I didn't want to live in a cold climate because I'm from the tropics, but that's how I ended up in Pennsylvania.
So what made you jump to locums? Because you do full time locums now, correct?
I do. So after Pennsylvania, I went out to the West Coast and I was working in private practice doing physician only anesthesia. And I was just working a lot. I was doing a lot of spine and neuro. I actually loved the neuro because I love neurotrauma and craniotomies and all that stuff. But I was working a lot. And I remember like it was five of us rather. And if we wanted to take off, we would have to schedule it to where the other partners would have to cover for us. And I remember that I had family coming to visit me. My uncle and auntie came to visit me from Kenya. And so months prior to that, I had asked, my partners, I need these and these days off or whatever, right? And they had given them to me. So that I had told my family from Kenya that I'm gonna be off on these days. So come through to visit me on these days. So a few days before that happened, I don't know what fell through. I don't know what happened. They decided that they were not going to let me have all those 3 days. They were only going to let me have like one day. And my family has gone like 10,000 miles to come visit me, right? And so I only got to spend like one evening with them. And I had to leave work. I left him at the house with my ex-husband. And it was just like, this is too much. I don't even have time for my family. And I used to work like elective spine cases on the weekends. I was working a lot and I was just exhausted. And I'm like, I can't do this. So I decided to quit. And I remember on my last day, I was doing a scoliosis case, and I was third call. I was in the OR until 9 p.m. transfusing blood on this pediatric patient, trying to keep him alive because scoliosis cases bleed. And it's 9 o'clock, and I'm not even on call, and I'm still at work. And I was like, I'm so glad I'm quitting this job. I just had no life. I was working all the time. I was also in a very stressful marriage, and I didn't want to, I got tired of working, but I also didn't want to come home because my ex-husband was not treating me well. And so there was a lot of stress in my life. And so I decided I need a break. So I decided to do locums so that I could pick my schedule and take off whatever time I wanted to take time off and also get away from my ex-husband. And that's how it began in 2016.
Um, those scoliosis cases, I know because I do IOM. So for
Oh,
scoliosis cases, yeah,
yes.
very long and challenging cases.
Hmm.
So I'm sure you've worked with technologists, and I work with the technologists on the other end,
Yes.
doing
Yes,
IOM.
you
Yeah,
guys do.
yeah. I'm glad that you got out of that kind of job that's not treating you well. Santoshi and I actually recorded episodes on toxicity in medicine that it doesn't even end in residency, right? So it's
Mm-mm.
infuriating that you start your attending job and you think that there's this light at the end of the tunnel, that you have autonomy, you can take off whenever you want, you can
Right.
have vacation, you can have a work-life balance. And the majority of the jobs are not like that. You want
Mm-mm.
to take a vacation, you have to put vacation time 2 3 months in advance. Maybe it will get approved,
Maybe.
maybe. And then you have like kids off school, you have, for example, your husband has that time off. I mean, it's really really frustrating that after all these years of sacrifices, you still cannot even have a vacation time that you want.
Right.
It's
Yep.
crazy. So, what advice would you give to other women physicians, especially women of color, who are considering leaving traditional roles to have more autonomy?
I say do it. The thing I would say is you got to put your fear aside, okay? As a person of color in this country, you have to be, yeah, we do realize that we live in a racist society. That is very true. But I'm the kind of person who goes to small towns and small towns in the Midwest where it's full of Caucasians, but I love it. I love it because I love small towns. Big, and I hate traffic and people everywhere and the stress of the big cities. So I go to the small towns where it takes me 5-10 minutes to drive to work and there's no traffic. And typically, my experience 99% of the time has been positive. People are happy to have you there. And you will really experience such a different variety of hospital cultures that you may just be like, you know what, I thought I was leaving medicine. And then I realized it was my job, it was the location that I was at. So I've experienced it all. I've experienced the toxicity. Right now, I'm working in a place that is utopia for me. Like everybody, for the most part, in the hospital is happy, go lucky, helpful, want to get the cases done. I get treated with respect, and I really would like a little part-time job there, even though I can't move up there because it's way up in the Midwest, and I got to take care of my family down here in the South. My mom is mentally unwell, so I tagged him with my brother to take care of her. So it helps you just see a variety. I mean, I've talked to people. I talked to somebody just a couple of weeks ago who was thinking about leaving anesthesia because she was in a setting where she was being bullied by CRNAs. And she really thought, oh my God, I have to get out of this. I can't do this. And then she went to a different hospital and it was like night and day. And she's like, wow, now I realize it was the location I was at. She drove, 45 minutes away and everything is good. So to me, you have to put that fear aside and realize that there is a place out there that you are eventually going to find that is going to mesh with what it is that you're looking for, because there is so many different varieties of settings, so many different cultures of hospitals. But you have to be willing to also go to places that maybe are not typically minority friendly, in my opinion. So because I don't do a lot of work in the cities because typically the personalities in the cities is just fast paced, more difficult personalities, more egocentric personalities versus like what they say, the salt of the earth of the smaller towns, in my opinion. So put that fear aside, go out there and explore, because you will likely find a practice that really appreciates you and is really happy to have you and is really going to treat you well and pay you well.
We're going to pause here for this week, but don't go too far. We'll be back for part two next week and we'll tune into the rest of the conversation. Thank you.